welcome to Heretic Hammer. I am your host, Marshall, and I'm here with my co-host, Dylan.
Hello, good to be back.
That's right. And today is, our first dive into factions proper. Episode 1 went over base kind of general lore, right, of 40K. Now we get to go into the fun and the nitty-gritty of everything. So, that for today is going to be the next 2 episodes. Really, are going to be about the poster children. One way or another. If you have not even heard of Warhammer 40K, or you never played a game, you never read a book, you never looked at a model, you, however, have likely seen a Space Marine. Whether that be loyal or traitor, chaos, likely you have seen images of Space Marines, and honestly, I'm kind of willing to bet that, like, one way or another, when anybody gets into Warhammer 40K, that, like, again, between either the loyal or traitor, I think everybody does kind of find some type of enjoyment and attachment into any of the Space Marines, because it's just such an iconic design.
Yeah, I think iconic is a very good word for it. It is essentially the poster child, it seems like, for anything Warhammer 40K is the Space Marines, almost more so than the orcs are.
I like how your other side of that coin is the orcs.
It kind of is. Even going into, like, the deep history we went into in the first episode, that's, from an outsider's perspective, it's like, what do I know? I know Space Marines is what I see, and I see orcs. Maybe that's just, like, the most popular miniatures, that you end up seeing on the shelves.
I think orcs is definitely the most popular, especially for video games. So, like, whenever you're looking at, if, like, Warhammer games show up on, like, a Steam sale,
mm-hmm.
then those are kind of definitely the times where that happens. Really, whether or not you are either, a fan of either, I think kind of everybody gets attached to them one way or the other. So we're going to start, though, today, we're going to go over just while the 2 episodes in it are going to be about Space Marines in general, we're going to split them up between the loyal and the chaos Space Marines. And we'll go over in the Chaos Space Marines why sometimes I will refer to some as just a Traitor Legion and some as pure Chaos Space Marines, because there's some fun little tidbits about that. But that'll be next episode. In this episode, it's all about the Loyalist Space Marines. But before we get into that, let's start on the baseline. What makes a Space Marine a Space Marine? Because there's a bit that goes into that, and we kind of talked about it, but we can go into a little bit greater detail now. So, like, the base things that, like, make somebody a Space Marine is, they start as just a normal human. Like, nobody's born a Space Marine. They are general normal humans that then are adapted, essentially, because, like, I will refer to Space Marines as, like, the sons of the primarchs, because that's kind of like how they're denoted in the lore and whatnot. But that's the thing, like, they're not the sons of the primarchs through birth. It is through a dissection table. Like, they are implanted a specific gene seed that is held by each of the primarchs, and that was held in the, essentially, like, the systems of the Imperium by the Emperor, to make each of the 18 legions. So they end up then getting other genetic enhancements as well. They have 2 hearts, they have 3 lungs, and this is maybe one of the points where it hits in that level of being more of, like, a fantasy rather than pure sci-fi thing, because I don't actually know if there's any type of biological benefit to having maybe to a 3rd lung, but I don't know about a 2nd heart.
Yeah, how many chambers are in those hearts, I feel like, is the more pressing question.
Yeah.
How much blood is actually able to be pumped through. Also, maybe give them 4 stomachs, like a cow, so that they can digest things slower, if you're going to go that far.
Well, that it's actually some part of that. So part of what they also have then is greater resistance, and they're it kind of in that way. So like Space Marines don't need sustenance and the same. Like they already do kind of get everything much in a way. Like they do get things much slower. Like they really don't. They don't eat like humans do really anymore. Like they eat very small amounts of things and generally they're like these like they'll have if I remember correctly they'll have essentially like things that'll just carry them through for a long period of time. Like they essentially consist off of gym protein bars.
Protein bars and juice diets.
Yeah, pretty much. Like a great example is Space Marines have also like essentially they have a resistance. They're immune to most known poisons, in the galaxy. So like they can't, they won't get drunk from just normal alcohol, normal drugs. Like, I mean, how you think heroin's tough on us? You give that to a Space Marine, you ain't gonna feel shit. You ain't gonna do nothing. But so like for example, then though the Space Wolves Legion, they will distill a special mead from a poisonous plant that would just straight up kill a normal human, and they use that to get drunk
because they're not able to feel or get drunk off like normal alcohol.
Yes, but they have such a, as we'll get to, they have such a Viking culture that they still really befit into that whole shtick.
Okay, makes sense.
Yeah. All right, but then so and so obviously as we went through in the previous episode, there were the 18 known legions to society, at least despite the Great Crusade time, and they and inevitably they went through the Horus Heresy, and so now they're essentially split in half between being loyal and Chaos Space Marines, and now we have those sets of legions. So we are going to start off then with, beneficially at least, the first legion is the first legion, and that is the Dark Angels. The Dark Angels, because like for playing the game, the board game, there is like all of the rule books for each of the factions are in a book called the Codex, and Space Marines have their main codex, but then they're one of the few legions that get codex supplements. Actually, I think they're the only one, because if I'm going to teach you if we're going to kind of learn anything when we start talking about the tabletop game, especially through the series, it's going to be really essentially Space Marine players of the game. Like it's kind of like the white privilege of 40K.
Okay.
Like they get all of the updates, they get all the models, they get like Loyalist Space Marines specifically. They get all the they get all the books, the models, lore. They have like a carte blanche and everything. But yes, going back, First Legion, the Dark Angels, and they are headed by Primarch Lion L. Johnson, the second Primarch to return, or technically really to show up in the 40K setting, as technically he was never existing in the 40K setting until now. Just in lore.
So I'm trying to recall, Lion L. Johnson wasn't part of the Horus Heresy?
So he was, but like the Dark Angels were generally like kind of cut off during the heresy for a lot of it.
Okay.
And so he didn't really get to participate a whole lot. But the one thing that inevitably that kind of happened as a result of that is because of the potential issues and threats going on, he had left half of his legion on his home planet of Caliban, which Caliban is it's a feudal world. I think technically it's labeled as a death world to the Imperium, which generally means it just doesn't have any. It's not a hyper hospitable planet, and and generally doesn't give any form of resources outside of people to the Imperium. It's like it doesn't explicitly just mean that like it is literally a dead world. Like it's completely useless. There are still people on them, but
Yeah.
just not. It's not going to give any agriculture or anything like that. But nevertheless, at least I don't think it was a death world at the time that the Lion was on the planet. But because it was a very feudal world. Like some worlds, when when kind of the previous, like that golden age of man and whatnot, like when that whole thing crashed down because of all of the planets just being completely cut off from each other, a number of them like reverted back a number of years, like and a lot of them became a lot more feudal and basic. Some of them still had like firearms and stuff like that and some technology, so it became this like kind of mini mix of like tech and being very knightly or in feudal and stuff. So like kind of almost like a D&D campaign.
Yeah.
With like a hyper amount of tech, like what we would use as like arcanotech in D&D campaigns, but probably less advanced because it's kind of became more like people from the Renaissance or the medieval times learning and trying to figure out what does a gun do. But the Lion, so the Lion comes from that. The Lion comes from that type of world. So grew up in a very knightly organization, like very much like, and he brought that into the Dark Angels in fold. So they have a very knights aesthetic. They use a lot of roads, like very Knights of the Round Table, right? Like
Okay.
they have names like Ezekiel, Belial, like they borderline like biblical like names.
I was just gonna say biblical, yeah. Very,
Yeah.
very Crusades, very 16th centuries type stuff, yeah.
Yeah, and so the Dark Angels are split between three, I guess you could say, detachments. And that is the Green Wing, the Raven Wing, and Death Watch. The Green Wing is the main one that you will see. It's the normal looking Space Marines, green armor, maybe the robes and stuff, but like they're in green armor and they, are just kind of the general Space Marine. And then the Raven Wing they'll be in all black and they will
Not surprised.
ride like motorcycles, vehicles, like quick vehicles.
Okay,
and
surprised. Motorcycle. Where did the motorcycles come in? Sorry.
Yeah, I mean obviously there are a large number of vehicles in 40K, and
Okay.
the motorcycles are more like that's kind of more like
It's not like it's not
a
like the
lot more like you
motorcycles
took
that we
two
traditionally
ATV
know.
wheels and you just like set them.
Yeah. Okay. Sure.
They're not like Akira motorcycles.
Yeah. It's not just like a straight up Harley Davidson.
Yeah.
Eh.
And then the final kind of segment of the Dark Angels is Death Watch, which is a which is a large segment of Terminator style units of Space Marines, which, if you don't recall from the previous episode where I believe I mentioned it, Terminators are essentially just larger and bulkier types of Marines. They inevitably, if I remember correctly, the thing they come from in the Golden Age or the Dark Age of technology, as it would be known in the lore, but from that like golden era of man, like they were used as like Terminator style armor was like used to like clean the outside of ships. Like it wasn't even like originally used for like war and stuff, but that was just like how advanced humanity was, is like they even still had stuff that was better than that. but like because Terminators are like nigh invincible. Like they obviously can be killed, but like their armor is way thicker than normal Space Marine armor. They don't move nearly as fast because obviously it's a much bulkier armor, but they have heavier weaponry. You know, they are great at close quarters combat, and they will go through and survive numbers of like just enemies and be fine because they're just filled with so much toughness. But that's also why there's not as many of them, because obviously it's really expensive to manufacture that type of thing.
And were the Terminators exclusive to this Legion, or were there Terminators among the other Legions?
They just have a very special unit of them.
Okay.
All the other Legions kind of just like you make use of them, but like Deathwatch is like a very specific like trained segment where it's like these are all of Deathwatch are Terminators, and they get used for these specific tools. Because the thing about the Dark Angels, it's kind of like a thing, is a lot of the Legions have their own like special things, but some of them are kind of jack of all trades. But the Dark Angels are jack of all trades in the sense of like, instead of being each of them being a Swiss Army knife, it's like you gave each of them, like you made each Dark Angel really good at one tool, and then you sent every like you put a group of them that knows each tool to get out together. So like as a Legion, they could do everything, but like an individual like Marine or group or whatever is good at like one thing, like specifically.
Oh, okay.
I just spilled on myself. So you may be wondering, though, good question that some people ask. Why are the Dark Angels... Oh, yeah, also the Deathwatch is like bone white armor. Like specifically bone kind of hued color.
Okay.
But you may be asking, why are the Dark Angels green?
Yeah, because you mentioned before about like, you know, the Fallen and the Ravens and that being like all black, and yeah, I'm looking at the reference image here, and it's like, oh, it's like an emerald green. Was it because of like Lion? Did Lion wear green?
No, in fact, you may note. Well, there was green,
a little green,
and
highlights of green.
But you will notice, and if you look at a lot of models of him, you will see plenty of artwork with him with green. But if you look at a lot of his pre-heresy colors, there's black and red. And that's because of the Fallen, as I mentioned. Yes. So
yeah.
What happened was the main Dark Ages colors used to be black and red. They pretty much were all of that. And then what happened, as I mentioned earlier, Lion left half of the Legion on Caliban during the heresy. It was kind of in like portion of the Crusade as well. It was like this kind of mixed time. Because like I said, the Lion ended up getting kind of left out of much of the heresy because of the warp storms that were created by the traitors. So what ended up happening was, while they were gone, the Lion's right-hand man, Luther, kind of inevitably felt kind of peeved that he was left out of the end of the Crusade, and that festered into him being able to fall to chaos. And a number of the other high, like, ranking officials of Caliban that were left also did as well. They really just kind of followed Luther down the hole. But what's funny about that is many people on the planet didn't know this. So then all of a sudden, when the Lion and the other Dark Angels that he was with came back, they came home to be like, we did it! All of a sudden, the planet just shot at them in space. Like, they arrived, said they came home, and they were shot at. And so they're just like, oh, they're betraying us. Cool.
Oh, okay.
And so they went down to the planet and just started eradicating. However, there's a thing about that. I'll mention how Luther and the higher-ups fell to chaos, but not all of the Space Marines that were on the planet. And that's important, because many of the Space Marines on the planet weren't even aware that Luther had shot at and fired upon the Lion and his ships. So all of a sudden, they're getting rained hellfire upon by the other Dark Angels.
And they don't know why it's happening.
And they just think they're being betrayed. So
Yeah.
obviously they fight back and defend themselves. And then throughout the Battle of Caliban, inevitably what happens is a warp rift gets opened and the whole planet just becomes consumed by the warp. So a lot of the loyalist Dark Angels kind of just up and leave because they have kind of fairly ready access to their ships, and most of the fallen amongst the traitors and the leading the planet at the time, like Luther, get essentially sent into the warp, and many of them chucked out, kind of in and out. And if you remember from the last episode, the warp very much kind of, and this is going to come into some of the other legions here, the warp fluctuates time a lot, right? Mm-hmm. It's not always like you go in and out. It's like nether travel. You know, you'll come out another end, you're completely somewhere else. But especially if you're going through it unprotected, like as the ships do, it could also be many years later. For some fallen, 10,000 years later. So, as I mentioned earlier as well, the Lion is now returned into the 40k setting. Because inevitably what happened was after the Battle of Caliban, eventually the Lion literally just like went to sleep, like hidden, woke up in this like fey-like plane of existence 10,000 years later, and finds out, oh, I can fey walk, and fey walks into this camp with a fallen, and he's like, oh my god, it's one of those people that betrayed me, and he's like they like go into a fight because the dude doesn't believe when he says that it's, you know, he introduces himself as a lion. The fallen just doesn't believe him because he's like, the lion's dead, like he's been gone for years, and or at least like as far as I've known. And eventually they like reconcile, and that's when the Lion learns like, oh, people didn't know that Luther betrayed me, and they were thrust into this battle without knowing. And the thing about the Lion was he used to be very, while calm and onerous, very short tempered and like quick to decision, as many of the primarchs are. Mm-hmm. But this was kind of the like in this new aged, like this aged Lion L. Johnson. He was like, wait a minute, maybe something weird happened here. Maybe I should think about this. Which is very un-Lion of him. And so now they were able to kind of reconcile, and so now the Lion kind of current lore is he is attempting to round up a bunch of the fallen that are actually still loyal to the Imperium and the Lion himself as the Forgiven, and inevitably he's going to try to bring them back into the fold of the Dark Angels, because inevitably all Space Marines will follow their Primarch to what their decision is. And some of them, you know, may dissent, and some like one or two may be able to betray, but in general, like, Space Marines will always follow their Primarch outside of some type of existential thing like chaos and stuff like that. So we'll probably see more when their codex comes out next year, but that's kind of where the Dark Angels lore kind of is at. That's where it's left off at.
Okay.
It's like him beginning this reunion tour.
And I expect he can't really, like, does he have an order of operations that he's taking as far as trying to figure out who he wants to sort of bring back in with him? Like was there like a first target was like, I need to go talk to these guys first to bring them in under me as part of the Forgiven? Or is it just like whoever he comes across, essentially?
Yeah,
that
it's
he feels
largely
like he
just
can
who he
convert back
comes
to his
across,
side.
because a lot of the Fallen that are loyal just hit out. Because like some of the Fallen felt the chaos, right? You get sent into the warp, it's really easy to go insane and just
Yeah.
immediately fall off. But those who remained loyal, they just stayed in hiding. So they're just they're just, because they're like by themselves and they know they're not going to be able to kill an entire legion. And as far as they know, that legion's gone insane. So they are kind of like just moving their way back, and so he's just kind of finding whoever he can and then trying to protect them. He's able to, at least, because this Fey Walk ability is kind of like his own webway, if you will. Like, he's kind of able to traverse over planets by using this kind of little Fey world that he's got, like forest Fey world. And this kind of only developed through the 10,000 years that he was in slumber. So it's led a lot of people to believe that the primarchs have these innate special powers that just aren't known because most of them aren't around.
So it's easy to say that, like, the Dark Angel Legion, as it is, like the entire Legion would be considered disloyal then, in that sense? Like, if you're thinking about, like, the half of the legions that are still loyal to the Emperor and then the other half that split away, like, the Dark Angels would be considered disloyal or loyal at this point?
No, so the Dark Angels themselves are loyal. The thing that would happen is, with the Raven Wing especially, is like they are constantly just trying. Their big thing is they're just constantly trying to find and erase the Fallen, because they do not want anyone in the Imperium to know that happened, because they feel like then they'll just get they'll get discommunicated.
It's a mess they're trying to clean up and keep behind closed doors. They don't want anybody to see.
Yeah, exactly, because they're worried then that they're going to get dismantled and labeled as, as traitors, as Legion, because that half did.
Yeah.
So they really, like, the Dark Angels themselves really go through a lot of, like, interrogations. They've got, like, it's a whole thing. And then there's a character named Cypher, which is a whole thing. He's a Fallen, and that's like a whole thing. There's a whole set of books about him. Because he's like one of those characters where it's like he's kind of a good guy, but he doesn't also seem to be like true anti-hero kind of thing. So yeah, I mean, the Dark Angels that don't know about the Lion yet are still like trying to clean up and hide that secret, and then while still being, helping the Imperium. And then the Lion is inevitably, supposedly, going to come back to the Legion in full soon. But we don't have that piece of lore yet. Because there is, if you want to know more about the Lion, inevitably there is, in this new Lion, there was a book that came out at the very end of last year that kind of talks about his return into the setting, and is very good for that. But I think that's largely a lot of the things that you need to know about the Dark Angels. They are, the ones that are loyal and whatnot, very much kind of about trying to uncover the Fallen and deal with them, while also then dealing with other problems of the Imperium, right? All the general, normal ones, fighting Xenos, Tyranids, Orcs, whatever, other chaos.
And that's what Leon's doing at the present time as well, is he's just sort of in the process of trying to rebuild the Legion up to what it used to be.
Yeah, so yeah, Lion is also trying to then also just not only do that, but then protect those that he's finding as well.
Okay, gotcha.
All right, and then so let's move on. We definitely talked. The Dark Angels take a lot of time, but it's also just because they're one of the more fleshed out legions. Let's go to the one that's not, which is one of my favorites, but that's in the White Scars.
The White Scars.
So we are moving all the way down to the 4th Legion, led by Jagatai Khan of Chogoris, a very, somewhat also kind of feudal planet, very Mongolian, like themed and cultured. And the big thing about Jagatai Khan and the White Scars is speed. Gotta go fast.
Speed.
They are primarily a melee legion, they're very melee focused, and also very vehicle focused. They use
Hey.
land speeders, the bikes. They are all about movement, and they also can just run insanely fast. Part of Jagatai Khan's kind of own ability. He's very fast.
Okay, you know I have to ask.
What?
If
Yes.
they are very fast themselves and they are the concept of speed, like they are Lightning McQueen in Primarch form.
Yes.
What is the need for the vehicles then?
It's honestly a lot of it. I mean, it's the vehicles are still faster.
Okay.
But a lot of it stems to is a culture thing. Like they are the Tragoras and the White Scars, and then thus the White Scars themselves have a big hunting culture and big mounted hunting culture. So like one of the big things about the White Scars is they very much were like Xenos hunters, especially
Okay.
Drukhari. But there's not a whole lot that's like known about them in terms of like their their lore and having a lot of battles to the name. They don't have a crazy amount, and that's on purpose. They want you to underestimate them. They want you to think that they're nothing, so that when you fight them, you will understand the error of your ways.
Mm.
The biggest thing that they are known for, at least during the Heresy, is they were the ones who banished the Death Guard and their leader Mortarion from Terra during the Siege of Terra. They also were one of the later ones to join the Imperial cause because essentially they were getting their signals blocked for a while. So like Jagatai didn't know what was happening. He knew that there was some type of civil war happening, but he knew nothing because the 20th Legion, the Alpha Legion, were kind of feeding in specific signals, trying to kind of lean them towards the side of Horus. But inevitably, Jagatai Khan figures stuff out, and he decides, no, we're sticking with the Emperor. We're going to remain loyal. Like we're staying with the Emperor and the Imperium side. And so they are similarly very loyal Legion. But they are very much like you will find them mostly in stories about hunting Xenos.
Okay.
But I love the way that they are. I mean, they're the Speed Legion. They love using vehicles, which I love in the setting. And then they're very melee focused, which is one of my more favorite ways to play the game. So they're a great faction for like wanting to move in and out and be fast.
And there were no rogue factions within
No.
them. Nothing.
Really,
like,
the only group that has that issue is the Dark Angels.
the Dark Angels. Okay.
They either other ones just then turn to chaos. But now we get to go to my least favorite Legion as far as 30k goes, the Horus Heresy, which is the. Oh, sorry, and I misspoke. I said this was the 4th Legion. This is the 5th Legion.
5th Legion. Okay.
Yes, sorry. 4th Legion also was chaos. So, but now we get to go in order again to the 6th Legion in the Space Wolves with their Primarch Leman Russ. In terms of the Space Wolves, it's really obvious what they are. They are Vikings in space.
Okay.
That's it.
I can.
You figured them out. But Leman Russ is an asshole. I despise the character of Leman Russ. And the Space Wolves themselves are a tale of two legions. There is the Leman Russ Space Wolves, and there is the post-Leman Russ Space Wolves. Because, much like Jagatai Khan, who I forgot to mention, Leman Russ isn't dead, but he's missing. Jagatai Khan of the White Scars, he disappeared because he ran into the webway going to hunt down Drukhari. Which I really hope he does come back, because he honestly could have one of the most interesting stories. like, because he could have
Did
been
nobody
captured by Drukari, tortured, maybe this like awoke some type of power in him. You know, there could be so much to his story in like being in the webway, because the webway is such a weird menagerie of things.
Did nobody in the Legion try to set out and find him?
Oh, they do. Yeah, no, they absolutely
Yeah.
do. It's just there's only so much you can do in that scenario, right? So they're just trying to do what they can in the material world. You know, there's only so much that can be done for them.
Yeah.
So that's kind of the big thing with that. So Lehman Russ, similarly, disappeared after the Horus Heresy. He went into the Eye of Terror to chase after the traitor legions. To, you know, just put an end to them in the Eye of Terror, like inside the warp. So he hasn't been seen since. So here's the thing about Lehman, though, is and the 30K Space Wolves. They, to me, are hypocritical in the bad way, right? Because this is a grim, dark setting, right? Nothing's meant to be a happy ending, and I get that. But there's a good way to write that, and there's not. And this 30K Space Wolves, to me, are kind of the latter. Because Lehman Russ's role to the Emperor was essentially to be his, like, canine hound, right? Like, he really was, like, just the dog of the Emperor. And if, like, you're a good way to put it for me is if you are a fan of the 30K Space Wolves explicitly, you're probably a cop, because that's what they were. They were just the
enforcers of the Emperor's rule.
Like just these enforcers that like just they're incredibly loyal, right?
Yeah.
The Emperor's executioners is, I guess, another name for them, right? Like they're incredibly loyal, but they just like they're so hypocritical in so many ways. A great example is when they had to deal with Magnus and the Thousand Sons on Prospero, right? Inevitably, here's the thing, right? Like the Imperium banned and outlawed psychic space. It's psychic use in the Imperium as a whole, right? They felt it was becoming too dangerous, and Lehman Russ is one of the big people that didn't want it. However, he's a fucking hypocrite, because the Space Wolves had psychic users in their legions, but they didn't use psychic powers. They used rune magic.
Oh, that's so different.
Yeah, it totally doesn't use the warp in any way.
No.
Except it does. It's just being a psychic unit. It's just being a psyker. But regardless, and they continue to use them after that, mind you. But anyway, so that's the thing, right? Is the Space Wolves went to Prospero they were supposed to go there to arrest the Thousand Sons, and Horus intercepted it because he hadn't revealed his betrayal yet, and told Lehman Russ to go kill them. And a normal Primarch, honestly, any of the other Primarchs would have looked at that hadn't turned yet and were still loyal, would have looked at Horus and been like, that seems extreme. Lehman Russ just wanted the excuse. He allowed this to happen, and we all know that. Whether or not you're willing to accept it.
Okay.
Because they go, and the atrocities that they commit to the people and citizens of Prospero is like so much more than just trying to follow the Emperor's word. Like, he was just trying to settle his own anger and debt. In like anger debt, or in like revenge, or whatever you want to put it, right? So they get really annoying to me. But then you get to post Lehman Russ. All right, he goes to the warp. He's disappeared for 10,000 years, right? Now the Space Wolves are super cool. They still use the rune magic, but they don't they're not out there being like, you can't have any librarians anymore to the other legions. And they're crazy helpful, and they're crazy and they're crazy good to their own other loyalists. And like a great thing, a good example, right? When because there are all these 20 legions, but in the 10,000 years, right, almost every legion has had sub chapters show up, right? Like essentially it's like, it's like the White Scars, but just a little bit different, they have a different name, but they still have Jagatai Khan's gene seed, right? So they're technically from the 5th Legion, but they're just different in a small way, right? They focus maybe on a specific section of the gene seed to give them a unique identity. There'll be one for the Blood Angels, which will be a good example when we get to them. The Space Wolves couldn't get theirs because inevitably what happened to show up, and this was before Prospero and while Leman Russ was still around, is that their gene seed started to malfunction a little bit. And essentially, some of the units would become werewolves. And for a long time, they were hiding that, and they had to. And then, pretty much until they couldn't anymore, right? And, you would originally look at the original Space Wolves, and when it became essentially public, when this group of what they're called Wolfen units came back to the Imperium, and they found out they're semi-stable. They're not completely insane like werewolves. They protected them. They were like, we're not going to do this. We're not going to cast them off. You may see them as mutants, but they are still our brothers. And it was a whole thing with the Imperium, and it still kind of is a touchy thing, but
yeah, inevitably
they did defend them, which is unheard of to 30k Space Wolves. And they defended and then when their sub-legion came in, their second founding, which because of this Wolfen issue took a very long time to happen.
Yeah.
When they got their first one, many thousands of years later, I think it was actually in the 41st millennium, so in 40k, they were very accepting of them, incredibly accepting of them. And that just wouldn't have happened. And so it's kind of the thing of unless Leman Russ were to return and be a different person, much like the Lion, much like Lionel Johnson of the Dark Angels, I really don't want him to come back, because I feel like he's just going to make the Space Wolves bad again if he comes back and he's the same person.
Yeah, they're genuinely better off without him at this point.
Yeah, I mean, to me, because they have their problems, and they still befit the Emperor's executioners, moniker. They're just not as stupid hypocritical anymore,
mm-hmm.
and they're great to read about. But next, we're gonna go to a legion that may not be as directly good to read about, but are also incredibly loyal. And that is the 7th Legion, the Imperial Fists. One of the dumbest names, in my opinion, but hey.
Okay, hold on. Let me see if I can.
Legion.
Let me see if I can figure this out. So we had a legion that was focused on speed. We had a legion that was focused on wolves. I'm gonna assume that this legion is all about punching things really hard.
Kind of the opposite, actually.
Okay, what? Come on now.
They are the defenders of the Imperium. They are just staunch defenders led by Rogel Dorn, a just technical mastermind. He essentially has the ability to know how anything can be built. He can look at something and just essentially, his innate ability is to look at something and be like, I can build this with this. I can see, he looks at a group of materials and he can see what it can become, and then just do it. And so he was the one in charge of defending Terra during the Crusade. He was the main line of defense that held most of the traitor legions before reinforcements could come in. They were very much a pivotal reason that the Imperium still remains today. Or at least in the 42nd millennium. But Rogel Dorn, a little bit of a hothead. So a great example of this is he's known for during the heresy, or like in post Siege of Terra, for having the Battle of Pluto with the Alpha Legion and their Primarch Alfarius, where he fucking kills him. And it's like said that during that conversation, Alfarius tries to go to Rogodor, and he's just like, "Yo, I'm here." I'm like, "No, but I'm a double agent. Here's all the information you need to know." And then he just gets like that's like the meme of it, because it's like kind of what happened, but obviously to a greater extent. Like they had a real fight, but it's just like, "Yo, Rogodor, and I'm here to tell you all the secrets." This just gets killed.
And this was pre-heresy or during it?
This would have been just after the Siege of Terra. So essentially after Horus died, and as they're all kind of running out.
Yeah.
So like in the era, but like just after they lost, essentially everybody had to retreat. So yeah, so Rogodor conceivably kills Alfarius. Well, there's a lot to talk about that when we get to the Alpha Legion in the next episode.
Okay.
Because their Primarchs are a whole thing. And yes, I said that plural on purpose. Again, we'll get to that.
Uh-huh.
Topic for the next episode. Just to that's more to illustrate kind of sometimes he can make some rash decisions, right?
Yeah.
But Rogodorn, though, as far as we know, is currently labeled as dead. However, the thing about it that they have somewhat retconned in some more semi-recent years is essentially what happened was during the first Black Crusade, which was the primary son of Horus and like his kind of second in command, leading the Black Legion into real space to try to destroy the Imperium again, right? And during that first one, and to denote, the last one was the 13th, so you can guess how well the first 12 go, right? So during the first one, however, you could chalk it up to maybe a minute success in that Rogodorn leads this fight onto one of the leading ships of the Black Legion, and he essentially returns with they return with just a hand and a giant black coffin, essentially. And supposedly Rogodorn is dead in it. But it's it's like the video game rule, right? Or the movie rule.
If you don't see the corpse.
Like the superhero movie. Yeah, if you don't see the body,
Yep.
no body, no death. And that's kind of what Rogodorn is currently at, right? Originally, he was just found, like he was killed, right? And they had so now on the like main fleet ship of the Imperial Fists, they are from a planet, I forgot the name of it. Actually, I have it here. They're originally from... That's not right. They're technically from a certain planet. I don't remember what. This says Terra. That's not technically correct. But they're a fleet-based chapter. Like they generate, like their main headquarters is a large space station.
Okay.
And in that they have his hand, like his golden fist. Granted, they were named Imperial Fists before that, but it fits.
Who originally named them the Imperial Fists? Was that like the Emperor doing that, or?
Some of them, I actually am not immediately sure. The thing is, with a lot of the legions, the Inuit. Inuit is the original planet that they were from.
Okay.
Regardless, that's what they are now, inevitably, and that's what they were during the time that they had Rogodorn, right? But yeah, so as far as we know, he could or could not be dead. But what he had led into them and what they are is, like I said, staunch defenders, right? By the way, this imagery is of a Terminator unit that you're seeing here, Dylan.
Okay.
But yeah, they're defenders. Like they will set in place and they just won't move, and you can't move them. They just will remain.
Like a shield.
Yeah,
but
very
but
much.
We're gonna call them fists, even though they're a shield.
You could think of the fist maybe a little bit in terms of just like defiance in a way against the enemy. But yeah, I don't exactly, that part maybe I'm not the greatest thing on, but yeah, their biggest thing to be known for is the being able to hold off all of the traitor units, all the traitors from the Imperium, and then they're also known as having one of the most stable gene seeds. So they have one of the most. They are one of 2 legions that have the most founding chapters, or like secondary founding chapters. A great example of that is one that's kind of very well known in the Black Templars, which I actually believe we will touch on at the very end. I'm not sure. If we don't, we will. Or if I don't have a slide thing for it, we will. But they are they're one of the largest sub chapters of any of the legions, and they technically are from the Imperial Fists.
Okay.
It's like a good example of that. So they have the most. They technically actually have the first. There's one of their sub-founding chapters is technically the first one that was shown as art for 40K, and that was in the first edition cover of what became known as 40K, but was called Rogue Trader.
Okay.
It was technically the Crimson Fists, a second founding chapter of the Imperial Fists. And that's kind of a whole extra thing that we don't need to go into at this episode, but that's just a fun fact.
All right, so what is the current state of the Imperial Fists when we get into 40K?
Yeah, I mean, they're just still out there, doing whatever fights the Imperium asks of them, and utilizing their similar tactics, just going in, building fortification, advancing forward, building fortification, advancing forward, building fortification. That's just the way they do it. Incredibly efficient, and they hate the Iron Warriors. And the Iron Warriors hate them. Because they're essentially 2 sides of the same coin, which, again, we'll go over even further in the next episode.
Gotcha.
Because really, that rivalry has to be talked about with the Iron Warriors. Less here. Otherwise, next up, we skip a legion, and we're going to the 9th Legion. And that is the Blood Angels.
Blood Angels.
They are led by Sanguinius, one of the most beloved primarchs of all the Imperium. Everyone loved him. But now he's a dead-ass motherfucker. So he is known, obviously, he was very pivotal in the turn of the tide of the Siege of Terra.
Right.
When his legion came to the aid, the first legion that came to the aid of the Imperial Fists. And he's also known for getting straight up murdered by Horus.
So how's he doing now?
Yeah, he's not good. So he, you may have noticed, the interesting thing about him is his wings. And this is because when I talked about this in the previous episode, right, all the Primarchs, were kind of, the Emperor made the Primarchs, and then the Chaos Gods essentially just kind of yeeted them across space, right? And kind of through part of that, inevitably, Sanguinius got kind of touched by the warp, and it gave him this slight mutation of giving him these angel wings. Other than that, like I said, he was just well beloved by many of the other legions of Primarchs, people of the Imperium. He was looked at as an angel, hence the Blood Angels.
So the Dark Angels are also really into the whole wings thing, but Leon Johnson and none of the rest of the Dark Angels have wings themselves.
There's gonna be so many people that are upset me calling him Leon.
Well,
It's like literally lion. Like his name is literally lion.
so
like, spelled like
Lenny Johnson,
like the animal.
so Lenny Johnson wants wings really badly, but he doesn't have any.
Yeah.
It's exclusive to Sanguinius.
Yeah, I mean, honestly, most people wouldn't want the wings because obviously, like, it's looked at as a mutation, and that's a whole bad thing for in the Imperium. But yeah, the the Blood Angels themselves are then unfortunately known for one other thing. Technically two, but they're mixed to each other, and that is, as I mentioned, Sanguinius died. And unfortunately, that led to what is known as the Red Thirst and the Black Rage. So the Red Thirst, honestly, probably could have happened with Sanguinius around still. I don't know that it's exclusively just because he died, but inevitably we don't know because of he just died anyway. Mm-hmm. And it is this essentially, the Blood Angel are straight up vampires. Like, there is not another way to look at it. They're just vampires. They don't have, like, the sunlight sensitivity, but they drink blood, they sleep in coffins, and they have a very, like, Catholic, Gothic-inspired motif.
If they bite other people, do those people turn into vampires as well?
No, it is explicitly just because of the gene seed of Sanguinius.
Okay.
And they are also all just these beautiful dudes. Like, they all are very much like this, like, you know, the beautiful vampire aesthetic, much like Sanguinius.
Yeah.
Like, you'd see this Space Marine, he would have, like, eviscerate everything. You'd be like, oh my god, these are horrible. Or, like, these are such violent and, like, devastating warriors. Like, what horrible grisly veteran is under this mask? And then they would take their helmet off, and you'd be like, oh no, he's hot! The other issue that they have, though, is called the Black Rage. Which is explicitly an issue that happened because of Sanguinius' death. So something tripped in his gene seed when he died, when Sanguinius died. Probably because of that mutation and his kind of innate psychic abilities. Because, like, kind of the other thing about Sanguinius is he was essentially raised in this world called Baal, which is still around, but inevitably, you know, was just covered in monsters, mutated, just gross creatures. And the people of that world were just constantly needing to hide and just surviving, right? And so he inevitably led them to glory, where he was able to conquer the planet and take it over. And a lot of that kind of was because of a lot of his other abilities, right? He was a big pusher of psychics, you know, because he had some of that ability himself. You know, he defended Magnus in, like, that whole thing where before they outlawed using psychic abilities in Space Marine legions. So when he died, something in that of him tripped the gene seed of the remaining of his sons, and they now will go into something called the Black Rage, where they will literally see everything on the battlefield, every enemy, every other being. As far as I can tell, not the brothers and stuff, but, like, not the other Space Marines. Like, they can seemingly discern who are enemies and not, but they will see all of their enemies. They see themselves there, on Horus's ship, above Sanguinius's body, and they are ready to strike. Like, they will scream out Horus on the battlefield and just go fucking berserk. Like, they will just go wild and just constantly killing all of these Horuses, you know?
But they're not actually Horuses.
No, they're just seeing things.
Okay.
There's seemingly there's no known return from being in the Black Rage. So if you succumb to the Black Rage, you get sent into a segment called the Death Company. As you can see here, the Blood Angels are generally very red. The Death Company are all black with some white or some red kind of accents. And And inevitably, you are sent in the Death Company because you are essentially just kind of put off into a really dangerous battlefield so that you can die an onerous death in battle.
Okay.
The only Blood Angel member to defeat the Black Rage is their like primary librarian named Mephiston. He's been able to overcome the issues of the Black Rage and is still able to be around, completely conscious, and now doesn't see everyone as Horus. But yeah, the Blood Angels have a lot of great stories to them. They got a lot of great Horus Heresy stories, a lot of great 40K stories. They're kind of, but they do keep their Red Thirst and Black Rage a secret to the rest of the Imperium. So not to be all goody two shoes, like say an Inquisitor were to come around and they were to notice like a black, like a red, like any of that stuff going on, that Inquisitor ain't making it home.
Do the Blood Angels and the Dark Angels ever intermingle? Do they have any conflicts between those two legions?
Not any conflicts, but just as many. They will. They intermingle as much as any of the other legions, right? Any of the legions generally will sometimes have joint efforts. Yes and no. Mm-hmm. Most of the time, though, when there's like joint efforts happening, just because of sheer numbers, most of the times it ends up being like Blood Angels and Ultramarines, or Blood Angels and Imperial Fists, or Imperial Fists and Dark Angels, and whatever, right? Like White Scars and Ultramarines, because it's like a lot of times Ultramarines and Imperial Fists, because they're the most numerous, get sent somewhere,
mm-hmm.
and then they get backed up by other legions. Especially because the number of legions are much smaller in number. A good example will become the Salamanders when we get to them near the end. And actually, our next legion, actually, great segue, and that is the Iron Hands. Can you guess why they're called the Iron Hands?
Okay, do they at least punch everything?
They don't punch. But why would they be called the Iron Hands?
They slap.
No, that would be because Primarch Ferrus Manus has an iron hand.
Oh. I hate this.
That's right. They are the Technological Legion, though. They're essentially the Adeptus Mechanicus Space Marines.
Wait. Time out. So you've got the Imperial Fists, right? And their Primarch's thing is that he can look at like a complex machine and a complex machine of materials and see in his mind how to put them together, how to organize them. But then you have this entirely separate legion that is the Iron Hand, and their Primarch has an Iron Hand, and they are part of the Adeptus Mechanicus. Why?
They're not part of. It's just like, if you look at what the AdMech is, and then you look at what the Iron Hands do, it's kind of like the Iron Hands are just like the Space Marines version of them. So like, they're probably just really good friends, but they're not like this. They're not like together.
It's because it seems like they're two halves of the same building things.
Fists, the Imperial Fists are very specifically like fortifications, buildings,
mm-hmm.
Staunching up defenses. The Iron Hands are very much like power weaponry, machine, like vehicles.
Okay.
Like they use a shit ton of what are called dreadnoughts, which are essentially walking weaponized sarcophagi for almost dead Space Marines.
Okay.
So they're all about just, like the machine, building better machinery, higher advanced weaponry, right? They're like that type of machinery, not like just fortifications. But honestly, like they and the Imperial Fists probably work very well together. Ferrus Manus, also dead.
Oh, okay.
He's probably one of the least notable of the Primarchs because he just is like very vanilla. He didn't have much going on for him. He was just really good friends with with the Emperor's children, Primarch Fulgrim, who then betrayed and killed him. Like cut off his head level, killed him. So like definitely killed him. We know we saw the death. The death was clear. And also like the Iron Warriors kind of got their numbers very heavily eradicated because one of the like early events of the Horus Heresy was this event called the Battle of Isstvan IV, where it was 4 or 5 actually. I might be spacing on the number off a bit, but that was when essentially they revealed themselves. They were going to try to eradicate 3 legions: the Salamanders, the Raven Guard, and the Iron Hands. They were just going to essentially, they like led them onto the planet and then just rad bombed the whole planet just to completely eradicate them. Obviously, like those 3 Primarchs survived that initial thing. There was a fight afterward, and then that's where Ferrus Manus died to the hands of his best friend. So that was kind of the unfortunate betrayal aspect of that. But obviously, they were able to survive the heresy enough to where they exist today, and very much, are machine people. There's not much for other extra stories. The only kind of extra tidbit is kind of like the AdMech. They're not. None of the Space Marine legions are great to civilians, except for one. Right?
I wouldn't expect them to be.
No, yeah. I mean, because they're demigods, right? Like they look at them. A lot of them look at themselves as higher than like normal humans.
Mm-hmm.
The Iron Warriors are especially extra to that, because they have that whole like, the machine is stronger than flesh kind of thing, right? You can't corrupt metal. Metal doesn't decay, despite that they do, but regardless.
So
in both accounts,
are these guys the like, when I saw the weakness of my flesh, it disgusted me, dudes?
Very much.
Okay.
So I think that quote comes from a Mechanicum, like a tech priest of the Mechanicus, but they are very much the same.
Gotcha.
So they look at other civilians just like, ew, you're flesh bag, gross. They don't really care as much. They will just kind of serve their means and serve the Imperium. The people less so. They're a dime a dozen. They know that there's trillions upon trillions of people in this galaxy. They don't need to care. But then we move on, because again, not much else to say with them. Is the most notable of the Space Marine legions.
Hey, I know that guy. He's blue.
In that, that's right, and that's the 13th Legion, the Ultramarines.
Ultramarines, yeah.
Led by Rabute Gorilla Man.
Oh, that's his full title?
Well, it's Rabute Gilliman, or
Gilliman,
as some will say. I've heard both in audiobooks, so I don't know which one is technically correct. I say Gilliman because I don't like the way Gilliman sounds. It sounds dumb. But my question for you, Dylan, is how many times have you thought about the Roman Empire?
Oh, are we doing this? Is that what we're doing? We're bringing them.
Well, that's what the Ultramarines are.
God damn it.
They're essentially just the Roman Empire as a Space Marine Legion.
Listen, I like to think that I'm one of those people that only thinks about the Roman Empire like once or twice a year, okay? This is resetting the clock in a way that I wasn't able to like prepare myself for.
Yeah, unfortunately, I'm forced to think about it only in the sense of the Ultramarines because of dealing with them. The Rabute he's kind of a boring Primarch. He was the first one to get resurrected and brought into the 41st millennium, but he, like, in terms of, like, especially his original thing, he's just very vanilla. His big thing is just that he's very smart. He is, they are official, like, he's the one that looks at, I mean, he had the most successful, like, section of the Imperium, right? Because it was called Ultramar, and I mean, look, he understands. Yes, it's important to have war. It's important to make sure that to fit all the like aspects right to like when you're conquering. But then he understood like after you conquer the planet, the best way to also and to deal with a war-torn area, right, is to ensure that you have proper supply lines, to make sure you have good trade routes, to ensure that if an attack happens, that nobody is caught off guard, right? That they're not just going to figure it out on themselves. You need to connect everything. He understands this, and that's why he's so successful at what he does.
So he wasn't about just like, destroy these, cities or these landscapes or whatever, and then just leave them. He was more about like, once you win the war, once you take over this area, now you gotta essentially build it up back to what it was, or even better.
I mean, like, it wasn't like he was doing it in like this amazingly like just way, but like he would do it in the sense of like, at least just knowing how to create success for the Imperium. Individual Marines are a little bit more like they're like mini Swiss Army knives, right? The Dark Angels are the Swiss Army knife, but it's because you put one specialized person with other specialized people, and you make a full group. They're just kind of all individually, generally whatever, and that's why, like, for example, like recently, the boomer shooter bolt gun came out. You play as an Ultramarine,
mm-hmm.
and the funny thing is, what wouldn't be lore accurate is all of the major demons you fight, right? Like, you literally fight the second most powerful of two of the gods' demons by yourself. That is nigh impossible. It's barely possible for a primarch to do, let alone, like, they can do it, but it's very hard. Let alone one random ass space marine. But there is nothing more powerful in 40K than a named Ultramarine.
If they have a name, they're golden.
They got so much plot armor, you don't even know.
Okay.
But yeah, I mean, that's what they are, right? But that's what makes the Ultramarines also very good, right? They have plenty of extra look and they have extra support. I mean, honestly, looking at this image here, right? Like they can look very cool, despite it being like sure, it's vanilla, but like
no, I think they look cool.
That Romanesque aspect to them still gives them a bit of that unique touch. And you also get known for at least actually being good at your job, unlike a number of other Marines.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, there's no crazy infighting or werewolf diseases or vampirism going on with them. They just happen to be
have the most
doing competently.
Yeah, and you have one of the other legions that has the most sub-factions, right? So if you're like, I like what the Ultramarines can give you in terms of like an effectiveness standpoint,
mm-hmm.
but I don't want to be blue and gold. I want to be something else. Well, then just paint them as whatever and just say they're a sub-faction to this, the Ultramarines, because that is exactly because there are so many of them.
Yeah.
You can just kind of pick a dart, and it's just like, even if it's one you made up, it's just like, that would work. That makes sense. So that's what's nice about them. It makes it really easy to come in to Space Marines and still kind of do what you want, but have kind of a lore background and like they're a great jumping off point is what they are, right? They're a great platform. You can go your own direction off of that, but it's such a solid bed. But we're gonna go to my actual favorite legion next, because like the White Scars are one of my favorite legions, and I love them a lot.
Mm-hmm.
But my true favorite legion is the 18th Legion, and that is the Salamanders, led by Vulcan of Nocturne. You may notice they're not like, they're black, but it's not like, like they're black. They have these red piercing eyes. An effect of the world of Nocturne, a volcanic death world where its people are all just these highly advanced blacksmiths.
Okay.
And so they are great at fire and the forge.
Do they build things for other legions?
You know, sure. Like you can see the imagery here. A lot of hammers.
Mm-hmm.
You know, right? They are really about, you know, like so. Like they will cast fine, like melee weaponry, but then also, as I mentioned, lots of fire.
Oh,
a lot
okay.
of fire.
All
Like,
right.
a whole lot of fire. They love fire. It's kind of why they're the Salamanders, right?
Yep.
Kind of befits that part of the name. Yeah.
Yep.
Lots of fire. They are also known, though, because of the way that the people in Nocturne are, they're also known as the kindest of the Space Marines.
Interesting.
They actually care, and they believe and realize that in order to protect the Imperium, you must protect its people. Otherwise, what Imperium is there, right? What humanity is there if you don't protect its people?
Huh.
A great example of this is, but that only goes to obviously a certain extent, right? Here's a great example. This is like an example story. It's not a real story, but it's like, this is just to exemplify. A Salamander and an Ultramarine, right? They're going through a war zone, right? They're just trying to reconvene with their units, right? And they've got, you know, this group of Necrons. They're coming down the fold. I will say Tyranids, right? Like the wave of Tyranids is coming in behind them. They only have so much time before this goes off, right?
Yeah.
They look to their right, and they look to their left. To the left, they see a quick escape, but it's the way through it is going to crumble soon. The Ultramarine will take the path. They will stick to the mission. They need to reconvene. They will leave to the right a child about to be crushed by a building. You know, a human, honestly, child or person, even adult. They see a civilian. They're about to be crushed. Their foot's stuck. They're going to be crushed by this building. The Ultramarine will take the left path. They will go. They will complete the mission, right? They chalk the person, and that it is a result of war, right? Casualty of war. They need to complete the mission, though, because otherwise they're going to get swarmed and potentially die. The Salamander will look to the right. They will see that person, that human, and they will, to their own detriment, they will find them. They will help them. Say that other way collapses, but they can push that human over the route and get them and tell them to just run that way. They will get to safety. They will do it. They will put them over, and then they will die having saved that human.
Mm.
Now, this is the difference, though. I gave that nice, heartwarming story about the human, right? Now, let's say that human is instead an Eldar. That Ultramarine maybe would see the Eldar and still just ignore it because they're like, it's going to die. I'm going to go.
Yeah.
The Salamander would look at that Eldar, look at it, rip out its flamer, shoot it, and then follow the Ultramarine.
Okay.
Burn the Eldar alive and then follow the Ultramarine.
Really don't like Eldars. Got it. Noted.
Well, it's specifically just like enemy of the Imperium.
Yeah,
right.
for sure.
They're incredibly loyal in that aspect. It could be, it could have, like I said, an Eldar because honestly, they're just the closest to like being human and potentially could ask for help, right? Like if it was, it's like if it was or if it was like a chaos cultist, right? And like they're like, I'm sorry, I betrayed, or it's like, I'm sorry, like, please for the Emperor, like help me. He'd just be like, nah, you betrayed the Emperor once, get shit on.
Okay, got it.
Burn alive, like it was just more saying that from that aspect of like, even if it was like a Eldar child, right? They're being left, they're dying.
Got it.
Like if you're an enemy of the Imperium, they don't give two shits. They will burn you to a bubbling pulp. Like you'll get saved by this Salamander. They'll like just burn like a bunch of chaos cultists, just ash, turn into straight bubbling ash, then turn around to the humans and be like, I'm here to protect you. Come with me. It's an amazing, like, duality, and I love them.
So how's their Primarch doing?
So he is another one. He is another Primarch that is essentially missing.
Oh, okay.
He's actually known to the setting as perpetual, much like the Emperor and a couple of other characters. So he can die, but as long as his soul remains intact, he can actually come back. This happened actually during the heresy. The Salamanders, being another one of those legions that were really just lambasted through Istvan, he got captured by the Chaos Legion called the Night Lords and was killed. However, tortured and killed. However, he, being a perpetual, was able to come back alive, be found, and then inevitably help the rest of the heresy. He now has such then disappeared, supposedly died, all that, and he has essentially sent his legion on a scavenger hunt, and essentially told them that if they could find like these 9 relics, that he will return. It's kind of like Leman Russ had a similar thing actually. So Leman Russ had told the Space Wolves that he will come back for the end times, kind of like that Ragnarok level thing.
Yeah.
Vulcan did something similar, except it not explicitly just being the end times, but just that like he will come back when the Legion needs him the most to lead them to victory. And then like he led these like relics. So he's gone, but we don't know where he is, but supposedly he'll return as long as the Salamanders find these relics, supposedly. It's kind of weird.
How many relics have been found? 0?
No idea. There's not a whole lot for the lore on that aspect, so
Gotcha.
Guess is as good as mine. One other fun fact about Vulcan. He is just a massive chunk of a man. Like, he is the tallest of all the Space Marine Primarchs. The only person that was taller than him and bigger and larger than him was the Emperor.
Interesting. All right.
Like, all their Primarchs are like 8 and a half, like in between like 8 and 9 feet tall. Or no, like they're between like 7 and 8 feet tall. Like Vulcan is like 9 pushing close to 10, right? Like he's got some height on his brothers.
Okay.
Which is funny because when you think about it, the humans have a similar power structure to the orcs, which is the biggest human is the one in charge.
Mm-hmm. Height makes right.
Exactly. All right, our final legion we're going to discuss, the 19th Legion, the Raven Guard.
Right, you brought them up earlier.
I did. They are one of the other ones that suffered greatly at the hands of Istvan. And they are led by their Primarch, Corvus Corax. You know?
Like a Corvid.
They are about stealth. They are about moving quickly. And apparently industrial dance music.
Nice. I'm in. I'm immediately in.
As you can tell, they very much have the bird aesthetic. They love their jetpacks. So do the Blood Angels, but them as well. And you may be wondering now, like, how the hell can a legion filled with this like loud ass humming 2-ton armored dudes be stealthy? And they do that just by proper tactics, right? You won't know they're there. They won't make themselves present to you until it is too late, kind of thing, right?
Mm-hmm.
They'll get you from a distance. They know how to track. They will follow you from afar. Unless you're Corvus Corax in the current day. Because Corvus Corax essentially kind of... He like went through a whole thing where like the heresy ended. He kind of had this like existential emo moment and then had decided he decided, I'm gonna go into the Eye of Terror and I'm gonna hunt down my brothers who betrayed us, right? Because he was getting a little miffed because by the time that he had decided to do this, a lot of the other loyal space or primarchs had disappeared, or the ones who died during the heresy, like Vulcan, Lehman Russ, Jagatai Khan, they had disappeared by this point. So he's just like, I'm gonna go. And his last words to his legion, fucking, like, if he couldn't make it, like, they couldn't make him more fucking obvious as it was nevermore. And he went into the warp.
Oh, boo.
They very much are users of close combat, these, like, the lightning claws in terms of the loyalist side.
Mm-hmm.
They obviously fit this bird aesthetic very well. If you might be wondering, like, why do some of these Space Marines have these bird helmets and others have these, like, graded helmets, and some of them are nightly, they've gone through a lot of eras of Space Marine suit designs.
Yeah.
And one of them, the one primarily during the heresy, was actually these kind of beaked helmets, because these were the very first Space Marine designs for Rogue Trader, and the first, like, edition of Warhammer used this beaked design of a Space Marine.
Oh, okay.
The one that we know with that, like, mouth grill, that didn't actually come until much later. That wasn't the first designed Space Marine by Games Workshop. It was these beaky helmets. But the Raven Guard, obviously, from the aesthetic aspect, still use those helmets.
Yeah. Do they have vehicles?
Sorry, what was that?
Well, so a lot of the other legions were using vehicles at this point. Do they use vehicles as well, or are they, like, primarily based on just flight?
No, yeah. I mean, they'll use any. They can use any of the things that are around for Space Marines, but it's just obviously from a, like, unless they're just doing an assault, which they do. They usually aren't coming in with those. If anything, the most that I would expect them to come into would be, like, things that don't leave treads.
Yeah.
Because there are like a couple tanks that are hovercraft that are, like, hovered. Obviously there are many different flying vehicles other than just the jetpacks and stuff. Because obviously it's hard to hide your movements if you're leaving treads everywhere, right?
Yeah, of course.
But other than that, yeah, I mean, they still can. I'm sure would. Sorry about that. They can and probably still would. They're just not as known for it. And yeah, that is all of the loyalist legions that remain. Notable chapters, as I mentioned before, are the Black Templars, which are from the Imperial Fists. They are very much like the religion of the Emperor formed, and they were like, we're gonna hop on that. They were founded by essentially the award that was given in the Imperial Fist for, like, the mightiest warrior, the greatest, like, duelist and fighter, became the Emperor's champion or chosen.
Mm-hmm.
And they took that moniker. One of the post-heresy Emperor's champions inevitably kept it for such a long time, and then formed the Black Templars. And their funny thing for them is that there's a rule, right, in the Codex, like the main rule book for Space Marines, and it's that you can't have more than 1,000 space of, like, a certain type of Space Marine or whatever. I can't remember the exact number, but there's, like, a rule. There's, like, a limit, a number limit to the number of certain Space Marines you can have in a certain way at a given time, unless you are on crusade. So the Black Templars are just always on crusade, so they don't have to fit that that rule.
Okay.
Supposedly a fun sub-faction of the Raven Guard. It's not confirmed, but they're called the Carcharodons. And they are just straight up Space Marine sharks.
Okay.
Like they like will utilize like wet rainy worlds to their advantage. They're ferocious fighters. And like their chapter master literally just like has this gigantic Terminator armor that like the thing around the pauldron just like it just has a bunch of like shark teeth and shit around it. They're just super cool looking. Like they're a great aesthetically, like they're just a great aesthetic army. They're super cool. And then finally, another fun one is another thing. They fight the Carcardons. They fight in complete silence.
Oh, like they
don't yell. They don't war cry.
Okay.
Nothing. Silence.
That's weird.
Yep. It's just to give you the eerie feeling of the shark, right? And those are the loyal Space Marines as they exist going into today. This episode took a lot longer than I thought it would. I had hoped it would be shorter than the previous episode, but I guess here we are. It might get shorter from cutting down. We had some technical stuff to get through, but yeah, that is the Space Marines. What do you think about them?
Okay. I like the White Scars also. I like the idea of like this legion that is primarily about like the hunting of the Xenos. And I think the Salamanders are cool as well. I don't know if I have a favorite at this point.
Yeah.
Yeah. And it is interesting to me just how many of them are missing their primarchs in the current time.
Specifically on the loyal side too.
Yeah, so I'm wondering if like when we get to the disloyal side, if that's going to be a common thread or if a lot of them have managed to maintain their primarchs.
Yeah, we'll definitely be talking about that with them. It is very interesting, and honestly, I would say, while I think you can have a favorite of both, I mean, I certainly do, but I think if you were to play on the tabletop, I think most people end up choosing one or the other, just kind of from a thematic side. And so in terms of picking like a pure favorite, I think, I think you got to see both sides of the coin first to see if you're really you're gonna follow the side of chaos or you're gonna follow along. Luckily, we don't have to go through many like weird lore details with the next one because they all have their own kind of like unique things, but then also, they're all kind of just, they don't have as much of the lore as the loyal Space Marines do, so that'll be that. But otherwise, that'll wrap it up for this episode. Why don't let's get out of here, and then we can get ready or inevitably we'll see anybody else who's listening or watching this in the next episode.
All right, we'll now become silent as sharks